Hello, my name is Emily Witt, and this is my IMP2 midterm exam. So to answer the first question, explain the stages of pre-production. Pre-production is basically everything that happens before you actually go out and start filming or start making something. So it's like getting ideas together, solidifying mindsets, getting your group of people together, making the budget and the timeline. Really that initial creative mindset to get you into actually doing something. I consider pre-production to be like the thinking stage, and like the mind stage with all like the math and the numbers and the dates and the blah blah blah. Production's more like the action stage where you're like doing things, and then post production's more like the engineering stage where you have everything that you've been working on for how many months, weeks, hours, days, whatever, and you have the initial ideas that you originally set out with, and you look at what you initially thought you were going to do and what you have now, and does it equal up to what you have in front of you now, and how can you use the tools and your computers and your mixers and all that other fancy equipment to make something actually happen and be engineered together. So there are multiple stages of pre-production, and each of them have some levels of significance. There's the project proposal, which is the summary used to like promote or sell your thing to any like marketable person or whatever. It's what you want your project to actually be. And then you have the premise, which is the concise, like, quick little statement or assertion that sums up the story or the subject matter. It's the why for the audience. So, for example, it's like a little, like, like 150 character, like, why. So, like, if you wanted to look at, I don't know, take, like, Ferris Bueller or something, it's like, why did they make that movie? Well, the quick little thing could be to, show an average teenager doing above average things or something like that. Then there's the synopsis, which is like the premise, only a little bit longer and more in depth. It's a short paragraph that describes the basic storyline or the overall theme of the piece, and it's walking the audience through the story through like storyboards and stuff. There's the treatment, which is the detailed summary of the plot, characters. It's much more specific. So you have, if you're looking at like chart wise, you have like the premise, which is like the concise like one liners like at the top, and then you get like bigger like the synopsis, then you get like bigger again with the treatments. Then excuse me. Then there's the scripts, which is the complete production guides on paper, being specific to like what will happen and breaking everything down. A movie came out recently called Save Mr. Banks, and it was about like Mary Poppins and whatever, but in the movie they show like the scripts and how like detailed and specific every single little thing is. They have like the storyboards up on the wall with like pictures and just how detailed and specific you have to get in pre-production to have a successful production and post-production stages. There's a script breakdown, which breaks down the script even further to include equipment and personal needs. If your actor needs something, or if there's something really specific for a scene that like you can't forget or something, like that'll be in the script breakdown. Production schedules, so it's like a timeline of when everything's going to happen. So, like we're going to meet at this location at this date, and then we're going to meet on a very like consistent basis, and just getting everything to be completely together. There's the budgets, which is obviously one of the most important things because you can't do anything without a budget, which is just how the funds will be spent into each category. So for like personal things and like equipment and like sound equipment and video equipment and hiring crews and food and just little things like that you wouldn't think of that are extremely crucial for budgets. Then there's the storyboard, which is the graphic visualization of the important shots, like the story outline in the shot list. So like in Saving Mr. Banks, during the movie they had like a board up with like drawings that they had done of like the scenes and like outfits that the characters are gonna wear and like who they're looking for to play a certain role, and just like little things like that make the storyboard happen. So I think for me the most important steps are probably the premise, synopsis, and treatment, and the budget, just because the premise and synopsis and treatments are the overall like general creative initial thing that has to happen in order for there to be a successful piece. And the budget, it's just like absolutely like, if there's no budget, there's no piece. So a little bit important. Why is pre-production needed? Pre-production is needed because if there was no planning, the entire project would be an absolute mess, and there would be no solid direction for anybody to follow. Depending on the size of your project, there can be hundreds of people working on this, and if there's no pre-production, then you have everyone going in 50,000 different directions, and nothing can really be like formed, or like everything is just absolute chaos. The pre-planning steps are crucial for they're the initial foundation for which the entire project is based off of. Without solid planning, even to like the absolute last detail, like who's gonna go get the coffee on Tuesdays, like one wrong move could cost the entire project hours of man work, thousands of dollars. It's like this should be the most important part of your entire piece, because if you don't have this, then you have nothing, basically. How does pre-production relate to other stages of production? Well, pre-production is extremely important for every stage. Well, okay, first off, there are 3 stages. Pre-production, which is the first part, production, which is the, the middle, like, core part, and then post-production, which is the last part. So pre-production relates to other stages of production. By it is, like I said earlier, the initial foundation of which the entire project is based on. While production is the actual actions and work, and pre-production is like the writing and the art and the creativity and the initial mindset behind it. It's like the math and the numbers and all that other fancy stuff. It is the deeper meaning behind which the piece is based off of. If you just throw a piece out there with no meaning behind it, then it's not going to really relate to the audience. There's not going to be anything really just to keep you enticed and with the overall piece. It's where ideas are hashed out back and forth until after hours of man work, the production can finally begin. And you should spend a lot of time on pre-production, because if there's no pre-production, then you're not going to have a successful production and post-production. Post-production is, like I said earlier, more like the engineering behind everything. So, like, getting, like, all, like, your, like, specific, like, technical skills and mindsets into actually applying it to a piece. Where the idea is formulated in pre-production, the actions taken during production are put together to solidify the final intent. Explain the processes of post-production and define the steps. So post-production is when you have everything together. You've, worked really hard to plan everything, you've worked really hard to film everything, and, like, sound everything, and now you have all this stuff, and you have to actually do something with it. So this is also, like, just, like, an incredibly crucial piece. You can't say a different stage of production is more crucial than the other, because all 3 of them are extremely significant and rely on each other to help them grow. So it's the digitizing of audio and video footage, the editing process, color correction, audio sweetening, transitional elements, DVD authoring, streaming, conversion, visual effects, music composition. It's just the initial necessary steps involved to actually develop the final piece. So, for example, with the video projects that we have working on now, we spend a lot of time in pre-production just working with our groups to figure out, okay, what do we want to do? Where are we going to go film this, and what's going to happen, basically. And then production was actually, like, physically showing up somewhere and doing work and bringing clothes and, makeup and all that other fancy stuff, because we were initially our own actors, too. So just all those initial things when you're, like, double role playing. And then post-production is, okay, where are we going to meet, like we discussed in pre-production, actually films, it actually puts the thing together, and it's taking everything that we have and, like, downloading onto a computer and using an editing process for, I think we're going to use either iMovie or After Effects, which is an Adobe program. And it's, getting everything in there and, like, editing things to a certain, like, extent, like, cutting it at a certain point and deciding, what music do we want to bring in and where are we going to cut the sound off and bringing something else louder in a different stage. Post-production, I think, personally has, like, 3 stages below it. You have the stage of just, like, getting everything together and, like, on a computer, like, on a device. And then you have, like, the second, like, okay, like, bounce ideas off each other, the creative, like, boom, 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 we're going to put this here, and this sounds good, and what about this? And then you have the final initial, like, editing and, like, running everything through and, like, correcting all of the tiny little details. And then after you bring everything together, that's when you have the final product. And it isn't after, editing is, like, necessary, and some people think it's annoying, but it's still incredibly, incredibly needed for everything that you want to ever do. So switching gears, in montages, there are 2 types. Well, a montage is an edited sequence of images that, when shown together, combine a new idea and more intense whole for a final project. And there are 2 main types of montages. The analytical montage and the idea-associative montage. The analytical montage is where you analyze an event for its thematic and structural elements, select the essential elements, and synthesize them into an intensified screen event. So there are 2 different types of montages under analytical. There's sequential and sectional. Sequential is when you condense an event into its key development elements and present them into their original cause and effect. It shows, like, natural progression, when, like, time is, like, slower, if that makes sense. And then there's sectional analytical, which it's temporarily stops the production or the progression of an event and examines an isolated moment from several viewpoints. So that, like, carefully examines a significant section or specific moment and it reveals the complexity of the event, the initial intensity, and the emotional power of the actual event. It's outside of natural progression because it's freezing a specific moment in time. So like sequential analytical is more like, hey, this happened over a big period of time, and we're gonna make it so it's shorter and not like a 5 hour long movie. Sequential analytical is more like, hey, there's this everything that's happened, but we're gonna freeze in on one specific moment and just take that in for everything that's been. And for some examples, I think the dance scene during the Breakfast Club where they're all like just dancing and like playing music is a good example, because it's like, hey, everything that's happening, we're gonna zone in on this one moment just to like kind of like break apart from like the intense things that are happening and just show like, hey, these are just like normal kids. And then there's the art museum scene in Ferris Bueller where, you know, like they have the music playing and they're like looking at all the works of art, and like Cameron's like zoning in on the impressionistic piece. And that's more like, you know, like this happened over a giant period of time and we're just gonna cut down and show like significant parts of that, about their entire like trip to the art museum. Because if they would have focused it on their entire like 2 hour trip, the movie would be like, you know, like 6 hours long. But they just hone in on like the specific moments that happen and add music to it and add Cameron in it, and it's just like all these different things that just get compiled together. One of the main examples I think of analytical montage is simply, I think, of movie trailers, when, you know, they don't want to show like the entire length of the movie because they want to still keep like the audience like enticed in the event, but they have to pick out the key parts that they want to focus and that they want to get out in their trailer. So I guess relating things back to pre-production, it's almost like it's the synopsis, I guess. You know, it's just a short like little paragraph thing where you have, like, edited scripts and things, and then you have the actual like montage of like important events that you want to show out in your trailer to hopefully get people to come by to go see your movie. And then the second type of montage is the idea associative, where it juxtaposes two seemingly disassociated events to create a third principal idea or concept. There are two types of idea associative montage. There's the comparison idea associative and the collision idea associative. Seemingly, they sound the same, but they're different. The comparison montage, it consists of succeeding shots that juxtapose two thematically related events to express or reinforce a theme or basic idea. It basically compares similar themes with dissimilar events, taking like two different things and like how like they relate together. And then you have the collision montage, is when you take two completely different events to help reinforce or show a similar idea or feeling. It's combining different images to generate a new idea, or confliction to create a new idea. So one of the examples we talked about in class was the montage during one of the Rocky movies, where they're both working out and they're both like preparing, but the conditions are drastically different. Rocky has the more like rustic and like natural conditions to perform in, when you have the other guy who's like in this high-tech lab and gym, and he has all this money to be spent on him, and it's just like, it's kind of showing, you know, they're both like getting ready and they're both like working out like the big match or whatever, but it's still like two completely different like environments and places of playing. And one of the things I know I think of is during the first High School Musical that I saw when I was in 6th grade. It's they're both like doing different things to like, you have like the math event, which is like the big math game, and then you have the like to like the theater show, and they're both leading up to relating to the basketball game, which is like the common theme in the overall piece. So you have like you'll see like shots of like the math lead event where it's like they're like busting out numbers and like science and all that stuff, and then like you'll shift to like the theater where it's like they're dancing and they're singing, but then they overall have like similar viewpoints that show that they're both like working hard, and how like different timing is like showing up, and how they're just gonna go back and then be related at the basketball game, because it's all like there's three different things that are happening at the same time, and they have to try and like work with time to like figure out like how they're gonna physically be at a place at a certain time. So you have three different like key, like if you think like three different key like high school groups, you have like the math kids, the theater kids, and the sportsy kids. It's like, how can we relate significant events that are happening with each event to help show the overall like solidifying event that like they're all in this together, and like all that like cheesy stuff. So yeah, that basically is me taking the exam. And I'm sorry because I realized I just rambled for an extra 5 minutes, but I hope it was effective, and thank you very much. Bye!